Going where you've never gone before. That's the subject before the house today. Something we've all done sooner or later in our lives. First day of school, first flight over the ocean to a foreign country. Parents experience it with new babies as they enter uncharted territory. Going where you've never gone before is what scientists, astronauts, and missionaries all do. And it's certainly what the Apostle Paul did as he traveled around the Mediterranean. But why do we go where we've never gone before, especially to the mission field? I want to offer three answers this morning, and the first one is this. We go where we've never been before to get out of our comfort zone. That's right. Going where you've never gone before gets you out of your comfort zone, and that can actually be a good thing for you if you're a little bit stuck where you are. Now, it can also be a little dangerous and a little bit scary if you listen to the passages I just read in 2 Corinthians and Acts, and Susan said as soon as I finished the scripture, instead of saying the word of the Lord, thanks be to God, she wanted to stand up and yell, but none of that will happen to you on the mission field. Well, you never know, Susan, what's going to happen. I was talking to Denise Moore the other day, who's on the trip, already took off yesterday and landed in Uganda today, and will be there for a couple of days with her daughter and then join us in Rwanda. And she was telling some people about where we're going. They said, Rwanda, isn't that where genocide was? Yeah, but it's a miracle turnaround. There's amazing prosperity there now. Yeah, but wasn't there genocide? And Denise said, don't worry, we've got kidnappers insurance. Well, I wasn't sure why. I was glad to know there was even such a thing, you know. She said, I hope we don't. I said, well, I hope we don't either, you know. Going where you've never gone before gets you out of your comfort zone. I remember doing mission work in South Africa, and we were doing some work in the black township Guguletu outside of Cape Town. And I preached in the church there, and we were the missionaries there, and we even left some young people, first time that whites had ever lived in a black township in South Africa. But at one point, we were riding in a van, and our host, Jan Du Toit from Stellenbosch, suddenly stopped the van because a woman came running out, agitated, yelling something at him. He took off and said, hang on, and we peeled around the corner, and there were 20 young men shouting epithets with big bats and sticks ready to beat us to a pulp, because that is what had happened to them. That's the way whites had treated them. You see, going where you've never gone before gets you out of your comfort zone. I remember once getting ready to go build a house in Juarez, Mexico, and was told, you know, that is the most crime-ridden city in all of Mexico, and it's a kind of a dangerous place to go. And I went to buy some supplies, and the manager of the store said, where are you heading? I said, Juarez. And he repeated the danger. And I said, oh, we're all right. We're a church group. And he said, oh, those are the best targets. You better pack a gun. I said, I'm not packing a gun on a mission trip. But then the very next day, I heard that a priest had been assassinated. So I asked one of our staff, Frank Diaz. I said, Frank, I'm a little concerned about this. He said, don't worry, we'll be staying right across the street from a prison. It's okay. And this was supposed to comfort me. See, now Paul experienced this over and over. Here is Paul planting churches like Johnny Appleseed planted trees, says Buechner. Everywhere he went, he was beaten, cajoled, jailed, and left for half dead at least half the time wherever he went. And you can almost picture him there at the end of his life, you know, reminiscing about all the places he had been with a cauliflower ear and a lump on his head the size of an egg. And he's thinking about all the places he had preached on windy street corners, giving his spiel, and nobody was really listening to him much here and there, but he plowed on. He continued on. Why? Because going where you've never gone before can actually get you out of your comfort zone. So that's the first answer to the question about why we actually do this. The second is it changes you as a person to go to the mission field. You are not the same person. Susan mentioned that before. You are almost more influenced by those you meet and loved, then you are able to influence and love and impact. Going to the mission field, going where you've never been before, stretches you and changes you. It can't help but do that. Now, why is that the case? Well, I want to get a little bit theological here, so just hang with me. It's because Christ is in you, the hope of glory, says Paul in Colossians. That's right. Christ in you, the hope of glory, is what is going on when you go to the mission field. Paul loves making this incarnational point over and over again in many of his writings. And it's the same incarnational point that John makes at the beginning of his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, in Greek, en arche, ein ho logos. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But how does it become flesh? How does it, beyond the life of Jesus Christ, it becomes flesh and dwells within us by coming into work in mission through you and me. So that every time we do something for others out in the world, it is Christ entering the world yet again. It is Christmas all over again. It's the mangers. It's the manger and the angels and the shepherds and the wise men all over again. Every time we build a house, even in Habitat for Humanity, helping those, every time we tutor a student in STAIR, every time we help someone, it is Christ right there with us. It is Christ through us entering the world yet again. And what we are called to do is to understand how God is calling us to do this special ministry and this special mission. And that's part of what we're doing here at IPC with our Strength Finders and Strengthen Service, trying to help people understand what are your true gifts? Why are you called to be here on earth? What is your purpose in life? That is the ministry of Strength Finders and Strengthen Service. And it's very interesting that we're going through the same thing on a more global scale and a more local scale as we in strategic planning think about what kinds of things are God calling us to do in Highland Hall that will make a difference in the world. Now see, when you go where you've never gone before, it stretches you individually and corporately. I think I've told you about the cardiologist I met in Taiwan who was just there having the time of his life. He was retired, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Well, I got bored playing golf in Florida. And I knew the Lord had blessed me, so I decided I need to give something back." And my wife agreed, and we signed up to be volunteers in mission, and we learned Mandarin Chinese, and we learned Hakka, and here we are, and you know, everybody eats fish, and hardly anybody has heart problems, so I don't have a lot of business, but here I am, doing my work, and I'm having the time of my life giving back. You know, going where you've never been before changes you. It stretches you. It makes you a better person. That happened to me when I was teaching at Union Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, and in the early 1980s was invited by the chair of the search committee at First Dallas, a gentleman from Cuba, Alabama, which he called Cuber. That's the only way he would ever say it. And he said, "You know, Carl, you're too comfortable in that ivory tower." And I said, "Yeah, but I enjoy the three great things about academia, June, July, and August. I don't want to give those up." And he said, "You need to get out here in the real world, in the swashbuckling life of the parish and the mission field." And he was right. And here I have left academia again and come to IPC. And here you are sending me off to Rwanda, a place that was a place of genocide, but now is a place of prosperity and growth. And we're excited to see what's happening. Every time you go where you've never gone before, it stretches you. I know a woman, a beloved missionary named Marguerite Mizell. She was a member of my church in Texas, and she, in the early 1920s, decided she was going to go to the mission field. And she told her parents, and And the church asked her, where do you want to go? And she said, only where they speak English, because I'm terrible with foreign languages. And she said, where did they send me? China, of all places. So I got on a steamer with a bunch of sailors in the early 1920s. Here she is, this single woman going on over, and she got there and she converted half the country until in the 1940s the communists kicked her out. And so she just learned Hakka and went back to Taiwan and converted half of Taiwan. When you go where you've never been before, it stretches you and changes you. Why is this? Because your plans are not always God's plans. And what we are called to do is get out there and do something more than just what will make us happy or famous, but will actually take us out of our comfort zone to a place of deeper comfort, because we are actually helping others. We are actually making a difference in other people's lives. I got an email a while back, and I just love this email. It's just very simple. It says, life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but instead rather to skid broadside, thoroughly used up and totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, wow, what a ride. That's what life is really all about. So when we go to a place we have never been before, we get out of our comfort zone and we find it changes us and stretches us. But there is a third and final thing it does, and that is it changes the world. Through Christ and through the power of the Holy Spirit, the world is actually transformed and changed, because it begins to break down barriers between us and people with whom we disagree. Politically, theologically, socially, we are able to go across the aisle and begin to talk to people who have different ideas. We can even sit down at table with them. Do you realize the most radical social act that human beings will ever participate in is the Lord's Supper? Because at this table, we sit in the presence of the risen Christ with people we would not normally invite to our own homes for dinner. That is the power of the gospel to change the world, to transform our lives and those around us. Thou preparest a table in the presence of mine enemies, says the 23rd Psalm. It is very powerful to see how going where you've never been before can actually change the world. In Peru, at the headwaters of the Amazon, Henry Bucher tells how once women were not allowed to travel alone, only with a man. But two women decided they would test that rule and canoed into forbidden waters, right into an area where the ethnic groups were known for killing strangers. And a chief stopped them, a chief who had a reputation for being ruthless. And they shared the gospel, and he became a Christian. And later, when asked, he testified that he had been so surprised that two women were riding together. He said, if it had been two men, we would have killed them. And if it had been a man and a woman, we would have killed them. But two women startled me so much, I decided I'd just listen to what they had to say. Well, that was his mistake, because then he was transformed by the power of the gospel. I've told you about the Russian mafia chief I met in the Ural Mountains who had killed people, who was an enforcer. And his girlfriend came home and she had been converted by a Pentecostal Presbyterian minister. I still have a hard time putting those words together. And he decided to go to the church and was going to beat up the preacher, but instead sat through the service. Instead, he was converted. He went to seminary. Now he's preaching the gospel in the Ural Mountains. This is the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ that transforms the world. One of my former parishioners' mother died a few years ago. Her name was Ann Tibbetts, and she was known all over San Antonio. She was a retired school teacher. And she loved to teach, but then she had retired and she got bored sitting around home and couldn't sit still, and volunteered to read to children in the poor barrio and Barnett Elementary School. And She even was working with them on their reading, almost like our STAIR program here. And she realized that they were having many problems of different kinds, and they needed an inspirational hero of some kind, some model who could come and inspire them and lift them up. And she decided David Robinson, who played for the San Antonio Spurs. Now that's the one I'm going to get. And she called to try to get him and was turned away. And she called. She was so persistent, she called every single day. And they finally got tired of her calling and said, just call the head of the David Robinson Foundation. Maybe they can help you figure out something. And they said, by the way, the head of the David Robinson Foundation is David Robinson's mother, and guess what? A retired school teacher. She said, I'm going after her. And she did, and the very next day, David Robinson spoke to her children and lifted them up. And when she called the mother to thank her, the mother said, oh, that's fine. Just call me anytime. I'll get him there for you, whatever you need. You see the power of the gospel. When you go when you have never been before, you go out of your own comfort zone, you are stretched and changed, and you become a better person. But most of all, you change the world through God's help and through the power of Jesus Christ. And if that isn't good news, then I don't know what is. God bless you all.